What if I told you that the elderly man pushing wheelchairs at one of Atlanta's most prestigious hospitals was actually one of the most brilliant heart surgeons who ever lived? And what if I told you that the arrogant young doctor who treated him like he was invisible would soon owe him his entire career? This is the incredible true story of Dr. Robert Martina, and I promise you by the end of this video, you'll never look at hospital staff the same way again. It was a busy Tuesday morning at Emory University Hospital in Atlanta, Georgia. The cardiac surgery wing was buzzing with activity, nurses rushing between rooms, residents reviewing charts, and attending physicians making their rounds. In the middle of all this controlled chaos, a 68-year-old man in a simple gray uniform quietly pushed an empty wheelchair down the hallway. His name was Robert Martina, but everyone just called him Bob if they acknowledged him at all. Bob had been working as a patient transport aide for 3 years now. His job was simple: move patients from room to room, help them get to their appointments, and assist with basic needs. It wasn't glamorous work, but Bob performed it with the same quiet dignity he brought to everything in his life. Most of the medical staff barely noticed him. To them, he was just another hospital employee, part of the background, invisible in the way that service workers often become in busy professional environments. Dr. Sarah Ken is different though. The 29-year-old cardiac surgery resident not only noticed Bob, she actively disliked him. Bob, she called out sharply as she saw him slowly maneuvering a wheelchair around a corner. "I need that wheelchair in room 314 5 minutes ago. Can you move any slower?" Bob looked up with patient eyes. "Of course, Dar Chen, I'll take it right away, and next time try to anticipate what we need instead of just wandering around aimlessly," Sarah added. Not bothering to hide her irritation, Bob simply nodded. "I understand, doctor." As Sarah walked away, shaking her head in frustration, she muttered to her colleague, "Dr. James Wilson, I don't understand why they hire these old guys. They're so slow, so out of touch with how a modern hospital operates." James, a second-year resident, shrugged. "He seems harmless enough, at least he's reliable." "Reliable isn't enough," Sarah replied. "We need efficiency. We need people who understand the urgency of what we do here." What Sarah didn't know, what nobody at Emory knew, was that Bob Martina had once been Darek. Robert Martina, chief of cardiac surgery at Johns Hopkins Hospital in Baltimore, Maryland. For 30 years, Dr. Martina had been one of the most respected heart surgeons in the country. He had performed over 5,000 cardiac surgeries, trained hundreds of residents, and pioneered several innovative surgical techniques that were still being used in operating rooms around the world. His colleagues had called him the magician because of his ability to save patients that other surgeons had given up on. Medical students would travel from across the country just to observe him work. But 3 years ago, everything changed. Dr. Martina's wife, Maria, had been diagnosed with early onset Alzheimer's disease. At 65, she was rapidly losing her memory, her independence, and her sense of self. The doctors said she had maybe 5 years left before the disease would take her completely. Dr. Martina faced an impossible choice: continue his prestigious career while watching his wife of 40 years slip away in a nursing home, or give up everything to care for her himself. He chose love over legacy. Dr. Martina took early retirement from Johns Hopkins and moved to Atlanta, where Maria's sister lived. He found a small apartment near Emory Hospital and took the first job he could find that would allow him to be home with Maria every evening. The job was patient transport aide. It paid a fraction of what he had earned as a surgeon, but it had regular hours and no call schedule. Every day at 5 p.m., he could go home to Maria. On this particular Tuesday, Sarah Chen was having the worst day of her residency. She was scheduled to assist Dar. Tricia Williams, the chief of cardiac surgery, in a complex procedure, a double valve replacement on a 72-year-old patient named Mr. Thompson, was a retired teacher who had developed severe aortic and mitral valve disease and subthalasmic implantic. The surgery was risky, but without it, he would die within months. Sarah had been preparing for this case for weeks. It was her chance to prove herself to Dar Williams and potentially secure a spot in the competitive cardiac surgery fellowship program. But from the moment they entered the operating room, things started going wrong. Scalpel Dar Williams called out, beginning the procedure for the first hour. Everything proceeded normally. They opened Mr. Thompson's chest, connected him to the heart-lung machine, and began the delicate work of replacing his damaged valves. Then suddenly the patient's heart went into a dangerous rhythm. "We're seeing ventricular fibrillation," announced Dear Kim, the anesthesiologist. Dr. Williams looked at the monitors with concern. "Increase the antiarrhythmic medication, already at maximum dose," Dr. Kim replied. The heart rhythm became more erratic. Mr. Thompson's blood pressure was dropping rapidly. "Sarah," Dr. Williams said, "I need you to assist with internal defibrillation." Sarah's hands were shaking as she reached for the internal paddles. This was far more complex than anything she had handled before. Charging to 20 joules, she announced. They shocked the heart. "Nothing." 30 joules, Dr. Williams ordered. Still nothing. The heart continued its chaotic, life-threatening rhythm. "Sarah, we need to try a different approach," Dr. Williams said. But there was uncertainty in her voice that Sarah had never heard before. Sarah looked at the monitors, at the flat line that represented Mr. Thompson's failing heart, and felt panic rising in her chest. She had studied this scenario in textbooks, but the reality was overwhelming. "Not sure what else to try," Sarah admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. Outside operating room 3, Bob Martino was cleaning the hallway when he heard the commotion. Through the glass window, he could see the frantic activity inside, the alarmed expressions, the rapid movements, the flat line on the heart monitor. He had seen this scenario hundreds of times before. He knew exactly what was happening, and he knew exactly what needed to be done. Bob stood frozen for a moment, torn between his current reality and his past life. He was just a transport aide now. He had no authority here, no credentials that anyone would recognize. But inside that operating room, a man was dying. Bob made his decision. He quietly opened the door to the operating room and stepped inside. "Excuse me," he said softly. "What are you doing here?" Sarah snapped, her stress and panic boiling over. "Get out! Can't you see we're in the middle of surgery, doctor?" Bob said calmly, addressing Dar Williams. "The patient has ventricular fibrillation with underlying long QT syndrome. The standard defibrillation protocol won't work." The entire surgical team froze, staring at the elderly transport aide who was speaking medical terminology with perfect precision. "What did you just say?" Dr. Williams asked quietly. "You need to administer magnesium sulfate, 2 grams IV push, followed by overdrive pacing at 100 beats per minute, then cardiovert at 200 joules synchronized with the WAR wave." Sarah stared at Bob in shock. "How do you know that?" "Because Bob said simply, I've seen this exact scenario 47 times in my career and I've saved the patient every single time, doctor." Williams looked at the monitors, then at Bob, then back at her patient. "Mr. Thompson had minutes left, maybe less. Who are you?" she asked. "Right now, I'm someone who can save this man's life," Bob replied, "but you have to decide quickly, doctor." The anesthesiologist looked at the heart rhythm on the monitor. "He's right about the long QT syndrome," she said quietly. "I can see it in the pattern." Dr. Williams made her decision. "Do it." Bob stepped forward. "May I?" Dr. Williams nodded, stepping aside. Steady, experienced hands that remembered every movement despite 3 years away from surgery, Bob took control of the situation. "Magnesium sulfate 2 grams, he called out. The surgical nurse, confused but following orders, handed him the medication. Bob administered it with the precision of someone who had done this procedure hundreds of times. "Now the pacing," he said calmly. "Set it to 100 beats per minute." The team followed his instructions. Within seconds, they could see the heart rhythm beginning to stabilize. "Cardiovert now," Bob said. 200 joules. Synchronized. The defibrillator charged. Bob placed the paddles with perfect technique and delivered the shock. The monitor beeped once, twice, then settled into a steady, normal rhythm. Mr. Thompson was back. The operating room was completely silent, except for the steady beeping of the heart monitor. Everyone was staring at Bob, who was quietly stepping back toward the door. "Wait," Dirt Williams called out. "Who are you?" Bob paused at the door. "I'm Dr. Robert Martina. I was chief of cardiac surgery at Johns Hopkins Hospital for 30 years. I've performed over 5,000 heart surgeries." The surgical team gasped. Sarah felt like the world had tilted on its axis. But you're a transport aide," Sarah stammered. Yes, Bob said simply. Here I am. There I was a surgeon. Today, I'm just a man who couldn't watch someone die when I knew how to help. Dr. Williams completed the surgery successfully, but her mind was reeling after Mr. Boz. Nopinson was stable and moved to recovery. She found Bob in the hospital cafeteria, sitting alone with a cup of coffee. Dr. Martina, she said as she approached his table. May I sit? Bob looked up and nodded, of course. I need to understand, Dirta Williams said. You're Dirta. Robert Martinet, I know that name. I've read your papers, studied your techniques. You're a legend in cardiac surgery. What are you doing working as a transport aide? Bob was quiet for a long moment. My wife has Alzheimer's, he said finally. She needs me home every evening. This job allows me to do that, but your skills, your knowledge, they're extraordinary. You could be saving lives every day. I am saving a life every day, Bob replied. My wife's by being there for her, by making sure she's not alone and afraid as this disease takes her away from me, doctor. Williams felt tears forming in her eyes. I'm so sorry. I had no idea. There's no reason you should have known, Bob said gently. I don't do this work for recognition. I do it because it allows me to be the husband Maria needs me to be. Word of what had happened in operating room 3 spread quickly through the hospital. Within hours, everyone knew that the quiet transport aide was actually one of the most accomplished cardiac surgeons in the country. Saracen was devastated. She found Bob the next morning preparing to start his shift. Doctor Martinet, she said, her voice shaking. I owe you an apology. I was rude to you, dismissive. I treated you like like I was just a transport aide. Bob finished gently, but I am just a transport aide. That's my job here. But you're so much more than that, Sarah protested. Sarah, Bob said, using her first name for the first time. A person's worth isn't determined by their job title. I was the same person yesterday that I am today, the same person who deserved your respect and kindness. Sarah nodded, tears streaming down her face. You're right. I'm sorry. Apology accepted, Bob said. But more importantly, what will you do differently going forward over the following weeks? Something beautiful began to happen at Emory Hospital. Dr. Williams approached Bob with a proposal. Dr. Martini, I know you can't practice surgery here without going through the credentialing process, and I understand why that's not practical for your situation, but would you consider serving as an informal mentor to our residents? Bob thought about it. What would that involve? Teaching rounds, case discussions, sharing your experience with the next generation of surgeons. You could do it during your regular shifts, and we could arrange for you to have a more flexible schedule. Bob smiled. I'd like that very much, and so began an extraordinary mentorship program. Bob would spend part of his day doing transport work and part of his day teaching young doctors. He shared not just his medical knowledge, but his wisdom about compassion, humility, and what it truly meant to serve patients. Sarah became his most dedicated student. She would seek him out during breaks, asking questions not just about surgical techniques, but about how to be a better doctor, a better person. Dr. Martina, she asked one day, how do you stay so calm in crisis situations? Because Bob replied, I remember that every patient is someone's Maria. Someone's husband, wife, parent, child. When you truly understand that, the pressure becomes about serving them, not about proving yourself. 6 months later, Mr. Thompson, the patient whose life Bob had saved, was fully recovered and back to teaching. He had heard about Bob's story and wanted to meet the man who had saved his life. Dr. Martina, Mr. Thompson said when they met, I understand you gave up your career to care for your wife. Bob nodded. It was the right choice for our family. I want you to know, Mr. The Thompson continued, that because of you, I'll be able to walk my daughter down the aisle next month. I'll be able to meet my grandchildren. You didn't just save my life. You saved all the moments I have left with the people I love. Bob's eyes filled with tears. That's all any of us can hope for, more time with the people we love. Today, dear Robert Martina continues to work at Emory Hospital. He still does transport work, but he's also become the hospital's most beloved teacher and mentor. Young doctors from across the country request rotations at Emory just to learn from him. The hospital has established the Dr. Robert Martina Excellence in Compassionate Care Award, given annually to the healthcare worker who best exemplifies the values of service, humility, and patient-centered care. Sarah Chen is now a successful cardiac surgeon, but she credits Bob with teaching her that technical skill without compassion is meaningless. She visits Maria regularly, bringing flowers and spending time with the woman whose husband taught her what it means to be a healer. Maria's condition has progressed, but she still has moments of clarity. In those moments, she tells Bob how proud she is of him, how much she loves him, and how grateful she is that he chose to spend these precious years by her side. This story reminds us that heroism comes in many forms. Sometimes it's the dramatic gesture in the operating room, but more often, it's the quiet daily choice to put love before ambition, service before recognition, and compassion before career advancement. Dr. Robert Martina could have continued his prestigious career, adding to his already impressive legacy. Instead, he chose to measure success differently, by the comfort he brought to his wife, the knowledge he shared with young doctors, and the lives he touched through simple acts of service. In a world that often values titles and status above character, Bob Martinez shows us what true greatness looks like. Weirdation. It's not about the recognition you receive, but about the love you give. It's not about the position you hold, but about the people you serve. So the next time you encounter someone in a service, role the janitor, the transport aide, the cafeteria worker, remember Bob's story. Remember that everyone has a history, everyone has value, and everyone deserves your respect and kindness, because you never know when the person you're overlooking might be the one who ends up saving your life. If this story touched your heart, please share it with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe to our channel for more stories of hidden heroes and quiet courage. And remember, in a world that often judges people by their job titles, be the person who sees the human being behind every uniform, every role, every circumstance. Because true greatness isn't about what you achieve, it's about who you become in service to others. See you in the next story. Until then, treat everyone with the respect they deserve. You might be surprised by what you discover.